I sit in my car outside TechFlow Industries at 5 a.m. Friday morning, watching security lights flicker across the empty parking lot. My phone buzzes with 17 missed calls from CEO Nathan Brooks. I know exactly what those calls are about. Yesterday, CIO Margaret Thornfield humiliated me in front of the entire board, suggesting I retire already darling at 28 because I questioned a critical security flaw. Now their $290 million manufacturing system displays one devastating message: primary admin not found. Only I hold the master encryption keys. 6 weeks earlier, everything seemed normal in my world as Senior Systems Administrator at TechFlow Industries. I had graduated from MIT 3 years ago with dual degrees in computer science and cybersecurity, landing this position straight out of college. The company manufactured specialized industrial equipment, and their production systems required absolute precision and security. I designed most of the current security architecture myself, working 16-hour days to ensure every component was bulletproof. My modest apartment reflected my priorities. I drove a reliable Honda Civic, saved most of my $75,000 salary, and focused entirely on building my career. Most people my age were out partying or dating, but I carried a different motivation. When I was 16, my father died in a factory accident caused by a computer system failure that could have been prevented with proper security protocols. That tragedy shaped my obsession with creating systems that would never fail the people depending on them. During routine maintenance on a Tuesday morning, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden deep in the legacy authentication module was a back door that could allow external access to our entire manufacturing control system. The vulnerability existed in code I had inherited from the previous administrator, who retired 2 years before my arrival. If exploited hackers could shut down production lines, steal our proprietary formulas worth millions, or even cause equipment failures that could injure workers, I spent the next 72 hours documenting everything meticulously. The potential damage assessment showed we could lose up to $50 million in production downtime, face lawsuits from injured employees, and see our reputation destroyed if competitors gained access to our trade secrets. I created detailed reports with visual demonstrations, cost projections, and step-by-step remediation plans. Every technical detail was verified and cross-referenced. My first step was presenting the findings to my direct supervisor, IT Director Paul Harrison. Paul was a decent man in his 50s who had worked his way up from help desk support over 15 years. He understood basic network administration, but lacked the deep technical knowledge to fully grasp cybersecurity implications. "Clarissa, the system has been running fine for 8 years, Paul said, barely glancing at my documentation. "You're being overly cautious and creating unnecessary panic. We have budget constraints and can't chase every theoretical threat." I persisted, explaining how modern hacking techniques had evolved far beyond what the original designers anticipated. The vulnerability wasn't theoretical. It was a glaring weakness that any competent attacker could exploit within hours. I showed him recent news stories about similar attacks on manufacturing companies, including one that resulted in a chemical plant explosion. "Look, I appreciate your thoroughness," Paul continued, "but management wants us focused on keeping systems running, not finding problems that might never happen. We have the quarterly security audit coming up in 6 weeks. If the external auditors find anything, we'll address it then." His dismissive attitude frustrated me, but I understood his position. Paul was nearing retirement and didn't want to rock the boat with expensive security upgrades. He preferred maintaining the status quo rather than admitting that systems under his oversight had critical flaws. For 2 weeks, I tried different approaches. I enlisted support from Janet Walsh, a senior programmer with 15 years at the company who understood the manufacturing processes better than anyone. Janet was in her early 40s, pragmatic and respected by everyone from floor supervisors to executives. She immediately grasped the severity of the vulnerability. "This is exactly the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night," Janet said after reviewing my analysis. "One successful attack could shut us down permanently. We're not just talking about money. People's jobs and safety are at stake." Carlos Rodriguez, our network security specialist, was initially skeptical, but gradually came around as I showed him the technical details. Carlos was methodical and careful, preferring to verify everything himself rather than take anyone's word. After spending a weekend testing my findings in an isolated environment, he confirmed that the backdoor was real and exploitable. Dr. Emily Foster from Quality Assurance also understood the implications. As a former chemical engineer, she knew how interconnected modern manufacturing systems had become. A security breach in the IT infrastructure could trigger cascading failures throughout the production facility. In my previous job at a pharmaceutical company, we had a similar vulnerability, Dr. Foster explained. When it was finally exploited, contaminated products reached 3 different states before we could stop production. The lawsuits lasted 4 years and nearly bankrupted the company. After Paul refused to take action for 2 weeks, I made the difficult decision to go directly to CIO Margaret Thornfield. Margaret had a reputation as a no-nonsense executive who valued results over politics. She held an MBA from Northwestern and had 20 years of experience in corporate IT management. I scheduled a meeting through her assistant, prepared a comprehensive presentation with visual demonstrations, and practiced my explanations until they were clear and compelling. Janet warned me about Margaret's management style. "She doesn't like being questioned by subordinates," Janet cautioned. "Make sure you frame this as seeking her guidance rather than pointing out problems with her systems." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. Margaret's corner office overlooked the manufacturing floor through floor-to-ceiling windows. Awards and certifications covered one wall, while the other displayed photographs of her with various industry leaders. She was in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything. "What's this about Clarissa?" Margaret asked without looking up from her computer screen. "I have a budget meeting in 15 minutes. I launched into my presentation, explaining the vulnerability with technical precision, while emphasizing the business impact. I showed her the potential financial losses, demonstrated how the attack could be executed, and presented a timeline for implementing fixes. Every detail was supported by documentation and independent verification. Margaret's response shocked me. Not only did she dismiss the security concern, but she accused me of trying to justify my position by manufacturing problems that didn't exist. Her tone was condescending and dismissive, as if I were a child playing with toys rather than a professional identifying real threats. "Clarissa, I've been managing IT systems since before you were in high school," Margaret said, finally looking at me with barely concealed irritation. "This company has been successful for decades without paranoid employees inventing crises. Maybe you should focus on your assigned responsibilities instead of trying to redesign systems that are working perfectly." The meeting ended with Margaret suggesting that I might not be a good fit for TechFlow's collaborative culture. As I gathered my materials and left her office, I realized that my attempts to protect the company had somehow made me a target. Margaret wasn't just dismissing my concerns, she was questioning my judgment and loyalty. Over the following week, I noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with me. Margaret had apparently shared her assessment of my paranoid tendencies with other managers. Colleagues who previously sought my technical advice began consulting Paul or Margaret directly. My recommendations in team meetings were met with skeptical questions rather than professional consideration. The isolation was emotionally devastating. I had worked so hard to build my reputation and establish myself as a trusted expert. Now I was being portrayed as someone who created problems rather than solved them. The injustice burned in my chest, especially knowing that the vulnerability I had identified was real and dangerous. Janet remained supportive, but even she advised me to back down. "Margaret has decided you're a troublemaker," Janet explained privately. "Fighting her directly will only make things worse. Maybe you should look for opportunities at other companies where your skills would be better appreciated." That advice felt like surrender. Running away wouldn't protect TechFlow's employees or prevent the kind of tragedy that had killed my father. Someone needed to stand up for what was right, even if it meant risking everything I had worked to achieve. 2 weeks after my meeting with Margaret, I learned that she had been considering restructuring the entire IT department. Budget pressures and her desire to modernize operations had led her to explore outsourcing most technical functions to cheaper contractors. My position as senior systems administrator would be eliminated entirely, along with several other roles she deemed redundant. Margaret's plan wasn't just about cost savings, it was about control. She wanted to surround herself with people who would implement her decisions without question. Employees like me who raised concerns about security, or questioned established processes were obstacles to her vision of efficient management. The revelation that my job was already in jeopardy changed everything. Margaret hadn't been dismissing my security concerns out of ignorance. She had been planning to eliminate my position regardless of my performance or value to the company. The vulnerability I had identified was just an inconvenient reminder that the systems she wanted to outsource were more complex and critical than she understood. 2 weeks later, Margaret called an emergency board meeting about IT efficiency optimization. When I received the meeting invitation, I assumed it was finally about the security patch I had been requesting for over a month. I arrived early with updated vulnerability reports, proposed solutions, and cost-benefit analyses that demonstrated how a relatively small investment in security improvements could prevent catastrophic losses. The conference room buzzed with quiet conversation as executives filed in. CEO Nathan Brooks sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, reviewing financial documents, with the focused intensity that had built TechFlow into a $200 million company. CFO Linda Patterson arranged budget spreadsheets in neat piles, her expression indicating that any proposals would face strict financial scrutiny. Manufacturing Director Robert Kim looked uncomfortable in his rarely worn suit, clearly preferring the factory floor to boardroom politics. Legal counsel Thomas Wright sat quietly in the corner taking notes and observing everything with the careful attention of someone who understood that words spoken in these meetings could become expensive problems later. Margaret commanded attention as she stood at the presentation screen, her confidence radiating through the room. She began with a PowerPoint slide titled, "Streamlining Operations for Competitive Advantage," and launched into what I quickly realized was not about security improvements at all. TechFlow faces increasing pressure to reduce operational costs while maintaining our technological edge, Margaret announced. I've conducted a comprehensive analysis of our IT infrastructure and identified significant opportunities for efficiency gains through strategic outsourcing. My stomach dropped as she presented charts showing potential cost savings from eliminating internal IT positions. She specifically targeted my role as redundant and expensive, claiming that modern cloud services and managed IT providers could deliver better results at half the cost. Our current systems are over-engineered and require specialized knowledge that's increasingly difficult to justify from a budget perspective, Margaret continued. Outsourcing these functions would reduce our fixed labor costs by 37% while providing access to broader expertise and 24/7 support. I sat frozen, realizing this was an ambush. Margaret hadn't called this meeting to discuss security improvements. She was systematically dismantling the IT department and positioning my concerns as evidence that our systems were unnecessarily complex. When she opened the floor for questions, I couldn't remain silent. Standing up despite my trembling hands, I interrupted her presentation to address the security vulnerability that had started this entire conflict. Before we discuss outsourcing, I need to present critical security findings that affect our manufacturing systems, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We have a vulnerability that could result in production shutdowns, data theft, or equipment damage if not addressed immediately. The room fell silent as I connected my laptop to the projector and launched into the demonstration I had prepared weeks earlier. I showed the back door in our authentication system, explained how attackers could exploit it, and presented detailed financial projections for potential losses. This vulnerability has existed for years without problems, I continued, but modern attack methods have evolved. What was secure 5 years ago is now an open invitation for cybercriminals. If we outsource these systems without fixing this flaw, we're essentially handing the keys to our most sensitive data to whoever wants to take them. I demonstrated the vulnerability in real time using a test environment, showing exactly how an attacker could gain unauthorized access. The technical details were complex, but the implications were crystal clear. Any competent hacker could shut down our production lines, steal our proprietary formulas, or manipulate our quality control systems. Margaret's response revealed the depth of her animosity toward me. Rather than addressing the security concerns, she attacked my credibility and motivations with surgical precision. "This is exactly the kind of fear-mongering I was talking about," Margaret said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Clarissa has been pushing this alleged vulnerability for weeks, despite the fact that our systems have operated flawlessly for years. She seems determined to justify her position by creating problems that exist only in theoretical scenarios." She turned to face me directly, her expression combining pity with professional disdain. The fact that you're interrupting a strategic business discussion with technical details that no one else in this room can verify shows exactly why we need to simplify our IT operations. Margaret continued her counterattack with devastating effectiveness. She claimed I was emotionally unstable and prone to seeing threats where none existed. She pointed out that I was the youngest person in the room and suggested that my lack of real-world experience made me unable to distinguish between theoretical risks and practical business decisions. In my 20 years of IT management, Margaret said, I've seen many junior employees who confuse complexity with competence. They create elaborate technical scenarios to demonstrate their importance without understanding that business success requires practical judgment over academic perfection. The personal attack hit harder than any professional criticism could have. Margaret wasn't just dismissing my technical findings. She was questioning my maturity, stability, and fundamental competence. She made it sound like my concerns were the product of inexperience and anxiety, rather than legitimate security analysis. Nathan Brooks, Linda Patterson, and Robert Kim nodded along with Margaret's assessment. None of them had the technical background to evaluate my demonstration independently, so they relied on Margaret's interpretation of the situation. From their perspective, I was a young employee creating problems for her own benefit, while the experienced executive was trying to solve budget challenges with practical solutions. Thomas Wright looked uncomfortable, but remained silent. As legal counsel, he understood that cybersecurity breaches could create massive liability issues, but he also recognized that challenging the CIO's technical judgment could create internal conflicts that would be expensive to resolve. The killing blow came when Margaret stood up, walked over to my seat, and delivered her verdict with a smile that never reached her eyes. Maybe it's time to retire already, darling, she said, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to mask the venom underneath. Let the grown-ups handle business decisions while you focus on entry-level responsibilities more appropriate for your experience level. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. The casual dismissal, the condescending tone, and the public humiliation in front of the entire executive team created a moment of crystal clarity. I wasn't dealing with a professional disagreement about technical priorities. I was facing someone who viewed me as a threat to be eliminated rather than a colleague to be heard. The room remained silent as board members absorbed what had just happened. Some looked uncomfortable with Margaret's tone, but no one spoke up in my defense. The power dynamics were clear. Margaret was a trusted executive with decades of experience, while I was a junior employee making inconvenient accusations. I gathered my materials without saying another word, maintaining whatever dignity I could salvage from the situation. Walking out of that conference room felt like a death march, with every step echoing my professional failure and personal humiliation. Nathan Brooks thanked Margaret for her thorough analysis and scheduled a vote for the following week on her outsourcing proposal. The meeting concluded with discussions about implementation timelines and contract negotiations, as if my security concerns had never been raised. Back in my office, Janet and Carlos were waiting anxiously for news about the meeting. They could see from my expression that things had gone badly, but the full extent of the disaster became clear as I recounted Margaret's presentation and personal attack. She basically called me an incompetent child in front of the entire board, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside. She turned my security concerns into evidence that I'm too immature and paranoid to work here. Janet was furious on my behalf, while Carlos looked stunned by the professional betrayal we had witnessed. Both of them understood the technical validity of my findings, making Margaret's dismissal even more infuriating. That evening, I worked late in my office while the building emptied around me. I reviewed the system architecture with fresh eyes, trying to understand how Margaret could be so confident in dismissing legitimate security concerns. The manufacturing system was the heart of TechFlow's operations, generating millions of dollars in revenue and supporting hundreds of jobs. As the primary administrator, I had complete control over access credentials and security protocols. The system required my biometric scan and personal encryption keys for critical maintenance functions, a security measure I had implemented to prevent unauthorized changes. Margaret's outsourcing plan would need my cooperation to transfer those credentials to the new contractors. For the first time since the meeting, I smiled. Margaret had made a crucial error in her rush to eliminate me. She had assumed that systems could be transferred like physical assets without understanding that modern cybersecurity relied on personal authentication that couldn't be simply reassigned. I began to formulate a plan that would force the company to recognize my value and address the security concerns I had raised. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting the systems and people who depended on them. The plan crystallized when I discovered that Margaret had already contacted the outsourcing company and scheduled them to take over Monday morning. She intended to terminate me Friday afternoon without any transition period, assuming that the new contractors could simply assume control of systems they had never seen before. Her arrogance would become her downfall, and my technical expertise would finally receive the recognition it deserved. The game had changed, and I was ready to play by new rules. Working through my lunch breaks over the next week, I began investigating Margaret's management decisions with the same methodical approach I used for technical problems. My administrative access to company systems provided insight into financial records, vendor contracts, and budget allocations that painted a troubling picture of Margaret's leadership. The IT budget had been consistently inflated for the past 2 years, with expenses exceeding actual needs by significant margins. Vendor contracts showed payments to companies that delivered questionable value, and some software licenses appeared to be purchased multiple times through different shell corporations. The pattern suggested either incompetence or intentional fraud. Janet's observations provided additional pieces to the puzzle. Margaret frequently left early on Fridays for vendor meetings that never appeared on her official calendar. Security badge records showed her accessing the building on weekends when no legitimate meetings were scheduled. Her behavior indicated activities beyond normal executive responsibilities. Janet had also noticed deleted emails in our server backup systems that mentioned consulting fees and performance bonuses not reflected in official company records. These communications suggested financial arrangements that bypassed normal accounting procedures and oversight mechanisms. Carlos contributed technical evidence that was even more damning. His analysis of network activity revealed unauthorized data transfers to external servers occurring during Margaret's weekend building visits. Proprietary manufacturing formulas worth millions of dollars were being copied to personal storage devices without any legitimate business justification. The three of us met secretly at a coffee shop after work to compile our findings. The evidence painted a clear picture of Margaret's criminal activities. She was embezzling funds through fake vendor contracts and stealing intellectual property for personal gain. Her outsourcing plan would eliminate the people most likely to discover her crimes. "This explains why she's so eager to get rid of us," Janet said, stirring her coffee nervously. "We have access to the systems and records that document her theft. The outsourcing contractors won't know what to look for, and by the time they figure out something's wrong, Margaret will be long gone." Carlos nodded grimly. "The data transfers I tracked show she's been stealing trade secrets for at least 18 months. Our manufacturing formulas, customer lists, and production processes are worth more than our entire annual revenue if sold to competitors." I realized that my security concerns had inadvertently threatened Margaret's criminal enterprise. My requests for system audits and enhanced monitoring would have exposed her unauthorized access and data theft. Rather than addressing legitimate security vulnerabilities, she decided to eliminate the person most likely to discover her crimes. The personal stakes had escalated beyond my job security. If Margaret succeeded in framing me for incompetence while covering up her theft, TechFlow could lose millions of dollars and dozens of innocent employees could be wrongfully terminated. My father's voice echoed in my memory about standing up to corruption and protecting workers who couldn't protect themselves. We decided to approach Nathan Brooks, directly bypassing Margaret entirely. The evidence was solid, but presenting it required careful strategy to avoid retaliation before the facts could be verified. We compiled a comprehensive dossier with financial records, network logs, and communication evidence that documented Margaret's criminal activities. Margaret's pressure campaign against me intensified throughout the week. She questioned every decision I made in team meetings, scheduled performance reviews with HR to create a paper trail for termination, and subtly encouraged other employees to distance themselves from someone she wanted gone. The isolation was emotionally devastating, but it also provided clarity about Margaret's methods. She was systematically destroying my credibility and professional relationships to ensure that no one would believe my accusations when I eventually made them. Other employees avoided association with me to protect their own careers. Dr. Emily Foster remained supportive after learning about the manufacturing risks posed by Margaret's security negligence. Several factory floor supervisors had noticed system instability and performance issues that suggested unauthorized modifications. Even Paul Harrison began questioning Margaret's decisions after reviewing budget irregularities that he couldn't explain. The quarterly security audit scheduled for Monday created additional urgency. External auditors would definitely discover the vulnerability I had been reporting, along with evidence of Margaret's unauthorized system access. If she fired me before the audit, she could blame all security failures on my alleged incompetence while hiding her own criminal activities. Building alliances became crucial for survival. I needed people who could corroborate my technical findings and provide witness testimony about Margaret's suspicious behavior. The evidence was strong, but presenting it effectively required credible supporters who couldn't be dismissed as disgruntled employees. Margaret's desperation became apparent when I intercepted an encrypted email revealing her plan to frame me for the embezzlement and intellectual property theft. She intended to use my administrative access as evidence that I was the only person who could have committed the crimes, turning my technical expertise into proof of guilt. The email detailed how she would plant forged evidence, suggesting that I had created the fake vendor companies and authorized fraudulent payments. My requests for security improvements would be portrayed as attempts to cover my tracks, while my technical knowledge would be presented as evidence of sophisticated criminal capabilities. Margaret's plan was diabolically clever. She understood that my technical skills made me a credible suspect for cybercrime, while her executive position protected her from suspicion. The same expertise that made me valuable to TechFlow could be twisted into evidence of criminal intent if presented properly to non-technical investigators. Realizing that I was about to be framed for crimes I had tried to prevent, I understood that defensive measures were no longer sufficient. Margaret had declared war, and my only option was to strike first with overwhelming evidence that would expose her true character before she could destroy mine. The game had evolved beyond professional conflict into a battle for survival, with everything I had worked for hanging in the balance. Margaret's arrogance and underestimation of my capabilities would become the weapons I used to defeat her, but only if I acted quickly and decisively. Friday afternoon arrived with the weight of inevitability. Margaret scheduled what she called an exit interview with HR Director Susan Martinez for 3 o'clock, though I hadn't been officially terminated yet. The timing was calculated to coincide with the end of the work week, minimizing witnesses and giving her the weekend to finalize her cover-up. Margaret had spent days preparing forged evidence that painted me as a sophisticated cybercriminal. Fake system logs showed me accessing financial systems during off hours when I was actually at home sleeping. Fraudulent vendor contracts bore my digital signature authorizing payments to companies that existed only on paper. Bank records suggested that consulting fees from these shell corporations had been deposited into accounts bearing my name. Working with Janet and Carlos through encrypted communications, I had traced the digital forgeries back to Margaret's executive workstation. Her abuse of administrator privileges allowed her to backdate entries and modify audit trails, but she hadn't been careful enough to hide the metadata that revealed when and where the forgeries were actually created. Security camera footage that Janet had painstakingly reviewed showed Margaret working alone in the office during many of the times the fake logs claimed I was present. The discrepancies were subtle but definitive for anyone willing to examine the evidence carefully. The HR conference room felt like a courtroom as I entered at exactly 3 o'clock. Susan Martinez sat at the head of the table with a stack of personnel files and legal documents. Nathan Brooks occupied his usual position of authority, while legal counsel Thomas Wright prepared to take detailed notes of everything discussed. Margaret commanded attention as she presented her case with theatrical precision. Her evidence looked convincing to non-technical eyes, and her presentation was polished and professional. She had clearly rehearsed this performance, knowing that my career and freedom depended on how well I could refute accusations that seemed supported by official documentation. The forensic analysis of our systems reveals a pattern of unauthorized access and financial manipulation that can only be attributed to someone with Clarissa's level of technical knowledge, Margaret announced, displaying her fabricated evidence on the conference room monitor. She showed the forged logs indicating that I had accessed financial databases at 2 a.m. on multiple occasions, supposedly to process fraudulent payments to shell companies. The bank deposits coinciding with these supposed transactions created a timeline of criminal activity that looked damning without technical scrutiny. These vendor contracts clearly show Clarissa's digital signature authorizing payments for services that were never delivered. Margaret continued. The consulting fees from these fake companies were deposited into accounts that trace back to her personal financial information. The presentation was masterful in its deception. Margaret had crafted a narrative that explained my security concerns as attempts to cover my tracks while portraying my technical expertise as evidence of criminal capability. She made it seem like I had been systematically stealing from the company while pretending to protect it. I remained calm throughout her accusations, knowing that emotional reactions would only support her claims about my instability. When Margaret finished her presentation and invited my response, I stood up and began dismantling her fabricated evidence with methodical precision. The timestamps on these financial logs are inconsistent with the metadata in the underlying database records. I explained, connecting my laptop to display the technical evidence Janet and Carlos had helped me compile. The entries were created last week, not months ago, as the visible dates suggest. I demonstrated how the forged documents contained digital fingerprints, proving they were created using Margaret's administrator account. The metadata showed creation times that coincided with her weekend visits to the office, when she had unrestricted access to modify system records. These vendor contracts appear to have my digital signature, but the cryptographic hash values don't match my actual signing credentials. I continued showing the technical details that exposed the forgeries. The signatures were generated using Margaret's executive access to impersonate my authentication tokens. Thomas Wright, being legally cautious, allowed me to present my technical analysis in detail. His legal training made him sensitive to evidence tampering, and he understood that wrongful termination based on fabricated accusations could expose TechFlow to massive liability. Margaret's professional composure began to crack as I systematically demolished each piece of her fabricated evidence. She became increasingly aggressive and desperate, claiming that I was using technical jargon to confuse non-technical executives and escape responsibility for obvious crimes. She's manipulating you with complex explanations that sound sophisticated, but are actually deflections from simple facts, Margaret said, her voice rising with frustration. The evidence clearly shows unauthorized access and fraudulent payments. Her technical knowledge makes her the only person who could have committed these crimes. The room's atmosphere shifted as the executives realized they were witnessing either sophisticated criminal activity or elaborate false accusations. Nathan Brooks, caught between trusting his longtime CIO and confronting evidence of serious wrongdoing, decided to postpone any decisions until a thorough investigation could be completed. Given the severity of these allegations and the complexity of the technical evidence, Nathan announced, I'm suspending any personnel decisions until we can bring in independent forensic experts to verify the facts. Both Margaret and Clarissa will continue their current duties until this matter is resolved. Margaret's face went pale as she realized her plan was falling apart. She had expected quick termination based on fabricated evidence, not careful investigation that would expose her crimes. Her desperation led to one final devastating accusation. Nathan, you need to understand that keeping Clarissa here poses an active threat to our systems, Margaret said, her voice trembling with barely controlled panic. She's been planning to sabotage our manufacturing systems. I have emails showing her discussing vulnerabilities with our competitors. This final lie was too elaborate and desperate, revealing the depth of Margaret's willingness to destroy an innocent person to protect herself. Thomas Wright immediately requested copies of these supposed emails, while Susan Martinez began documenting everything for legal protection. Over the weekend, Nathan assigned Thomas Wright to conduct a comprehensive investigation of both women. I volunteered to submit to polygraph testing and provide unrestricted access to all my personal accounts and communications. Margaret became evasive and claimed she needed time to gather additional documentation. The contrast between our responses spoke volumes about who was telling the truth. My willingness to submit to scrutiny contrasted sharply with Margaret's attempts to delay and deflect. Nathan began to understand that he might have been deceived by someone he had trusted for years. Saturday evening brought a moment of clarity as I realized Margaret would use the weekend to destroy evidence and escalate her attacks. With the security audit Monday and potential system compromise looming, she would take increasingly desperate measures to eliminate me before her crimes were fully exposed. I decided to implement the plan I had been developing since the humiliating board meeting. It was time to demonstrate exactly how valuable my technical expertise was to TechFlow's operations, while ensuring that Margaret's crimes couldn't be hidden or covered up. Sunday night would determine whether justice prevailed or corruption triumphed, and I was finally ready to use every skill I possessed to protect the company and colleagues who depended on me. Saturday night, I worked from my apartment developing a comprehensive plan to preserve evidence and secure TechFlow's systems against further compromise. The manufacturing control system required my biometric authentication and personal encryption keys for critical functions, giving me unique leverage that Margaret had underestimated in her rush to eliminate me. I created encrypted backups of all financial records, vendor contracts, and system logs that documented Margaret's criminal activities. Working through the night, I designed new authentication protocols that would prevent unauthorized access while maintaining system functionality for legitimate users. Every action was documented with timestamps and digital signatures for legal protection. Sunday evening at 8 o'clock, I arrived at TechFlow using my security badge to enter through the main lobby. The building felt eerily quiet with only emergency lighting illuminating the corridors. Walter Chen, our night security guard, greeted me with his usual friendly wave, unaware that he was about to witness the climax of corporate espionage and embezzlement. I established my command center in the IT office, connecting multiple monitors to watch both system status and building security feeds simultaneously. My hands remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was my one chance to save my career, protect my colleagues, and expose Margaret's crimes before she could destroy more lives. At 9:30 p.m., Margaret's black BMW pulled into the executive parking area with headlights cutting through the darkness. She entered through the executive entrance, avoiding the main security desk where Walter might question her presence. I tracked her progress through internal cameras as she moved purposefully toward the server room. Margaret carried a laptop bag and wore casual clothes, clearly planning for extended technical work rather than brief administrative tasks. Her confidence suggested she believed her plan was proceeding smoothly, unaware that I had anticipated her moves and prepared countermeasures. She attempted to access the manufacturing system using her CIO credentials, only to discover that all administrator functions had been temporarily locked, pending the investigation Nathan had ordered. Her frustration became visible through the security cameras as she tried multiple password combinations and backup access methods. Unable to complete her sabotage remotely, Margaret decided to physically access the servers in the restricted data center. She used her executive keycard to bypass normal security checkpoints, entering areas that required special authorization, even for senior management. I continued monitoring her movements while maintaining vigilant watch over system integrity. Margaret's increasingly erratic behavior confirmed my suspicions about her desperation and willingness to commit additional crimes to cover her tracks. The confrontation came at 11 p.m. in the main server room, surrounded by humming equipment and blue LED status lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. Margaret spun around when she heard my footsteps, her professional composure completely abandoned in favor of raw desperation. "What are you doing here, you little witch?" Margaret snarled, her carefully maintained executive facade cracking to reveal the criminal underneath. "You should be at home crying about your pathetic career instead of interfering with legitimate business operations." I remained calm despite her hostility, understanding that her emotional state would lead her to reveal information she intended to keep hidden. "I'm protecting TechFlow's systems from unauthorized access and data theft," I replied evenly. "The same job I've been doing for 3 years." Margaret's defensive posture shifted to aggressive intimidation as she realized I wasn't backing down from her threats. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she continued. "I've been planning your termination for months, and nothing you do tonight will change that outcome." I presented her with the evidence Janet Carlos and I had compiled: bank records showing fraudulent payments, network logs documenting unauthorized data transfers, and security footage proving her weekend visits to steal proprietary information. Margaret's face went through a range of emotions as she realized the extent of our investigation. "You've been embezzling money and stealing trade secrets," I stated matter-of-factly. "The vendor contracts, consulting fees, and data transfers are all documented. Your plan to blame me for your crimes isn't going to work." Margaret initially attempted denial, then switched to justification as her psychological defenses crumbled. "I've been carrying this entire department for 5 years while being paid less than men with half my qualifications," she said, her voice mixing anger with self-pity. "The company owes me compensation for years of underpayment and gender discrimination." Her admission revealed the twisted logic that had allowed her to rationalize stealing millions of dollars while destroying innocent careers. Margaret genuinely believed she was entitled to take whatever she wanted because of perceived injustices in her own treatment. When justification failed to sway me, Margaret resorted to threats and attempted bribery. She promised to destroy my career throughout the industry if I didn't cooperate, claiming connections with executives at every major technology company in the region. "You'll never work in IT again if you cross me," Margaret threatened. "I'll make sure everyone knows you're an unstable troublemaker who can't be trusted with sensitive information." When intimidation failed, she offered to split the stolen money if I agreed to remain silent about her crimes. The casual way she proposed partnership in criminal activity revealed how completely she had abandoned ethical considerations. Margaret's final revelation was the most damning. She admitted that framing me for her crimes had always been part of her plan, regardless of whether I discovered her theft. "My technical skills made me a perfect scapegoat, while my youth and inexperience would make my protestations of innocence seem like desperate deflection. Everyone expects young employees to make mistakes," Margaret explained with chilling calculation. "Your administrative access and security concerns would have made you the obvious suspect when the audit uncovered missing money and data. I was just accelerating a timeline that was already inevitable." I revealed that our entire conversation was being recorded by the security cameras that Margaret had forgotten were monitored and archived. Her admission of criminal intent and detailed confession would provide prosecutors with overwhelming evidence for multiple felony charges. Margaret's desperate attempt to destroy physical servers was interrupted by Walter Chen, who had been monitoring security feeds as I had requested earlier. Following protocols for weekend emergencies, he had contacted Nathan Brooks and Thomas Wright when he witnessed attempted equipment tampering. Realizing she was trapped with no escape route, Margaret made one final attempt to shift blame back to me. She claimed I had orchestrated an elaborate frame job to destroy her career using my technical skills to fabricate evidence and manipulate security systems. The irony was perfect. Margaret accused me of exactly the crime she had committed, revealing her complete inability to understand that some people possessed integrity and professional ethics that prevented such behavior. Her final revelation was unintentionally helpful. Margaret mentioned that she had been secretly recording conversations with various employees for weeks, trying to gather evidence of poor performance or disloyalty. However, her recording device had accidentally captured her own criminal conversations with accomplices outside the company. These recordings would provide additional evidence of a larger conspiracy involving multiple individuals and companies. Margaret's paranoia and need for control had created the very evidence that would ensure her conviction and imprisonment. As sirens approached the building, Margaret's criminal enterprise came to its inevitable conclusion. Her attempt to destroy an innocent employee had instead exposed decades of corporate fraud and theft while elevating the person she had tried to eliminate into a position of respect and authority. Monday morning arrived with Nathan Brooks, Thomas Wright, and Susan Martinez entering TechFlow at 6 a.m. to find Margaret detained by building security and me organizing comprehensive evidence of her crimes. Walter Chen had followed emergency protocols, perfectly preserving the crime scene and documenting everything for legal proceedings. The main conference room became an impromptu courtroom as I presented my investigation findings to the assembled executives. Financial records showed $2.7 million stolen through fraudulent vendor contracts over 18 months. Intellectual property theft included manufacturing formulas and proprietary processes worth over $15 million to competitors. Margaret's recorded confession from the previous night provided undeniable proof of criminal intent and elaborate planning. Her admission of framing me for her crimes demonstrated a level of premeditation that would significantly increase potential criminal penalties. The contrast between our appearances spoke volumes about character and integrity. Margaret looked disheveled and desperate after her failed sabotage attempt, while I remained calm and professional despite the personal attacks I had endured. The evidence spoke for itself without requiring emotional appeals or dramatic presentations. Nathan Brooks faced the most difficult decision of his executive career: Choosing between his longtime CIO and a junior employee had seemed obvious weeks earlier, but the overwhelming evidence of Margaret's criminal behavior forced him to confront his own judgment failures. I trusted Margaret with our most sensitive operations and financial oversight. Nathan said, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. Her abuse of that trust has cost this company millions of dollars and could have destroyed our reputation permanently. Thomas Wright contacted federal authorities, immediately recognizing that embezzlement and corporate espionage required prosecution at the highest levels. The scope of Margaret's crimes extended beyond simple theft to include potential national security implications if trade secrets had reached foreign competitors. The unanimous board vote to terminate Margaret and promote me to interim CIO reflected their understanding of how completely the power dynamics had shifted. CFO Linda Patterson publicly apologized for dismissing my security concerns, while Manufacturing Director Robert Kim praised my courage in exposing corruption despite personal risk. The external security auditors arrived for their scheduled assessment to find that my reported vulnerability was indeed critical and potentially catastrophic. Their preliminary report confirmed that my proactive security measures had prevented what could have been millions of dollars in losses from cyber attacks. Dr. Emily Foster was appointed to coordinate improved communication between IT and manufacturing operations, ensuring that security concerns would never again be dismissed as technical paranoia. The company implemented anonymous reporting systems and ethical guidelines that protected employees who raised legitimate concerns about corporate misconduct. Team vindication came swiftly, as Janet Walsh and Carlos Rodriguez received commendations for supporting my investigation, despite professional risk. Paul Harrison faced disciplinary action for failing to address security concerns, though his cooperation with the investigation earned him opportunity for redemption through additional training. My transition into the executive suite felt surreal after weeks of isolation and professional attack. Margaret's corner office became my workspace, though I immediately removed the photographs and awards that had represented her false achievements. The view of the manufacturing floor reminded me daily of the workers whose safety and livelihoods depended on system integrity. TechFlow's handling of the crisis became a case study in corporate ethics and whistleblower protection. Industry publications featured our story as an example of how technical expertise and moral courage could expose high-level corruption and prevent catastrophic losses. Professional recognition followed quickly, as cybersecurity organizations invited me to speak about insider threat detection and corporate governance. My story inspired other IT professionals to report security concerns without fear of retaliation, leading to industry-wide improvements in ethical standards. Margaret's federal investigation revealed that her criminal activities extended to multiple companies over 10 years. She faced charges for embezzlement, wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy, with prosecutors seeking maximum sentences to deter similar crimes. Her professional reputation was permanently destroyed as former colleagues and industry partners distanced themselves from association with her crimes. The scope of her theft and manipulation shocked even experienced corporate investigators. TechFlow's recovery exceeded all expectations, as improved security and ethical practices attracted new clients worth over $50 million annually. Our reputation for integrity and technical excellence became competitive advantages that generated substantial business growth. Company culture transformed dramatically as employees gained confidence in leadership that valued honesty and competence over politics and favoritism. Anonymous surveys showed significant improvement in morale, trust, and job satisfaction across all departments. My leadership style emphasized collaboration and respect for expertise regardless of age or seniority. The painful experience of being dismissed and attacked for raising legitimate concerns shaped my commitment to creating an environment where technical professionals could speak truth without fear. Building for the future became my primary focus as we developed long-term strategies that prioritized both security and innovation. Partnerships with universities helped recruit diverse talent, while our ethical reputation made TechFlow an attractive destination for top-quality professionals. The manufacturing system vulnerability was completely resolved through comprehensive security upgrades that exceeded industry standards. Our proactive approach to cybersecurity became a model that other companies studied and implemented. Margaret's sentencing to 8 years in federal prison provided closure and vindication for everyone she had harmed through her criminal enterprise. The judge's comments about the severity of violating corporate trust resonated throughout the business community. During Margaret's federal investigation, prosecutors discovered evidence linking her to an international corporate espionage ring that had been stealing American industrial secrets for foreign competitors. This revelation elevated my actions from exposing workplace corruption to protecting national economic security. The scope of the conspiracy included dozens of companies and hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. My investigation had inadvertently uncovered a national security threat that had been operating undetected for years. Federal agencies praised my methodical documentation and technical expertise, noting that my evidence had provided crucial insights into how international espionage networks operated within American corporations. The case became a landmark prosecution that strengthened laws protecting industrial secrets and trade information. My role in exposing the conspiracy earned recognition from congressional committees and federal law enforcement agencies. Testimony before House and Senate subcommittees helped shape new legislation protecting whistleblowers in the technology sector. The transformation from targeted employee to national security asset completed my journey from professional vulnerability to unassailable credibility. Margaret's attempt to destroy my career had instead elevated me to a position of respect and influence that exceeded my wildest expectations. 6 months later, I stood in what had once been Margaret's executive office, now transformed into a workspace that reflected my values and priorities. The corner desk held a framed photograph of my father alongside awards recognizing TechFlow's cybersecurity excellence and my personal contributions to corporate ethics. The view through floor-to-ceiling windows showed our manufacturing floor operating at peak efficiency, protected by security systems that exceeded industry standards. Our production teams worked with confidence, knowing that their jobs and safety were protected by technology they could trust. My permanent appointment as Chief Information Officer at 29 years old had shattered company precedents about age and experience. The board's unanimous decision reflected their understanding that competence and integrity mattered more than traditional qualifications or political connections. TechFlow's transformation under ethical leadership attracted clients worth over $50 million annually, proving that principled business practices generated superior financial results. Our reputation for technical excellence and corporate integrity became competitive advantages that our rivals struggled to match. The IT department I now led included 25 professionals across multiple specializations, all working in an environment that valued expertise and encouraged innovation. Training programs I developed were licensed by other companies seeking to improve their own corporate cultures and technical capabilities. Margaret's criminal prosecution had concluded with an 8-year federal prison sentence and $17 million in restitution orders. Her professional certifications were permanently revoked, and her name became synonymous with corporate corruption in business school case studies. The international espionage ring her crimes had exposed led to dozens of additional prosecutions and new legislation protecting American industrial secrets. Congressional testimony I provided helped shape federal policies that strengthened cybersecurity requirements for critical infrastructure companies. Personal growth through adversity had taught me lessons that no business school could provide. Standing up to corruption required courage, but technical competence and moral integrity ultimately prevailed over politics and manipulation. The experience proved that age and inexperience were less important than knowledge and character. Professional relationships flourished in the ethical environment we had created. Janet Walsh served as my deputy CIO, bringing her 15 years of experience to support rapid department growth. Carlos Rodriguez led our expanded network security division, implementing advanced threat detection systems that other companies studied and adopted. Dr. Emily Foster collaborated on cross-departmental initiatives that improved efficiency and communication throughout TechFlow. Even Paul Harrison, after completing comprehensive ethics training, became a valuable team member who supported rather than undermined security improvements. Romance entered my life through an unexpected connection with David Thompson, the federal prosecutor who had handled Margaret's case. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect for professional excellence and shared commitment to justice. David admired my technical expertise and moral courage, while I appreciated his dedication to prosecuting corporate crime and protecting victims. Our partnership balanced demanding careers with personal support that strengthened both our professional and emotional lives. Financial security allowed me to purchase a home in a neighborhood where safety and quality of life reflected my improved circumstances. My CIO salary provided independence and the ability to support family members who faced their own economic challenges. College funds I established for younger cousins honored my father's memory while creating opportunities for the next generation. Investment portfolios grew through careful planning and professional advice, providing long-term security that eliminated financial desperation as a factor in professional decisions. The Clarissa Protocols became TechFlow's signature contribution to corporate ethics, providing anonymous reporting systems and protective policies that other companies adopted industry-wide. Annual awards recognizing moral courage in the workplace honored employees who prioritized integrity over personal advancement. Speaking engagements at universities, professional conferences, and congressional hearings spread awareness about cybersecurity threats and corporate governance failures. My story inspired systemic changes that protected thousands of employees from the kind of retaliation I had faced. Industry recognition included appointments to federal advisory committees on cybersecurity policy and corporate ethics. These positions provided platforms to influence national standards and ensure that future professionals would have legal protections when reporting legitimate concerns. Mentorship programs I established supported hundreds of early career IT professionals facing similar workplace challenges. Scholarship funds provided educational opportunities for young women pursuing cybersecurity careers, creating pathways for diverse talent in traditionally male-dominated fields. The nonprofit organization I planned would eventually expand these efforts nationally, providing resources and legal support for technology professionals who faced retaliation for ethical behavior. Corporate partnerships would fund programs that strengthened both cybersecurity and workplace ethics across multiple industries. Legacy building had become a central focus, as I recognized how one person's courage could create ripple effects that benefited entire industries. Margaret's "retire already, darling" comment had inadvertently launched a career that exceeded anything I had imagined possible when I first discovered that critical vulnerability. Looking back on the journey from humiliated junior employee to respected executive, I understood that adversity had revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. Technical skills were important, but moral courage and persistence had been the decisive factors in achieving justice and creating positive change. The framed photograph of my father reminded me daily that systems were only as strong as the people who maintained them with integrity. His memory guided every decision about protecting workers and preventing the kind of negligence that had cost him his life. Professional excellence required constant learning and adaptation, but ethical principles provided unchanging foundations that guided decision-making regardless of external pressures. The experience taught me that doing the right thing might be difficult, but it was always possible for people with sufficient courage and determination. Future aspirations included pursuing an executive MBA to complement my technical expertise, with long-term goals of consulting for companies that needed to address similar ethical and security challenges. The knowledge gained through confronting corruption would benefit other organizations facing comparable threats. Standing in my executive office, I reflected on how completely my circumstances had changed since that humiliating board meeting where Margaret had dismissed my concerns with condescending arrogance. The scared 28-year-old who had walked out in silence had become a confident leader who transformed an entire corporate culture. Margaret's attempt to eliminate someone she viewed as a threat had instead elevated that person to a position of authority and respect that exceeded her own achievements. The underestimated junior employee had become the executive who exposed her crimes and protected the company she had tried to destroy. The ultimate lesson was that competence and integrity would ultimately triumph over politics and corruption, even when the odds seemed impossible. Technical expertise provided the tools for success, but moral courage and persistence were the qualities that determined who used those tools effectively. Sometimes the people who dismissively suggest you should retire already, darling, are the same ones who will desperately need your expertise when their own failures become impossible to hide. True power comes not from titles or seniority, but from knowledge, integrity, and the courage to act when action is needed. In a world where corruption often seems to win one person with technical skills and moral courage can expose truth and create lasting change. The key is never letting others define your worth and always being prepared to prove them wrong when they underestimate what you're capable of achieving. The key that unlocked Margaret's downfall was the same one that opened doors to my success: an unwavering commitment to protecting the systems and people who depended on technical expertise delivered with absolute integrity. That key had always been in my hands. I just needed the courage to use it when everything was at stake. Have you ever faced a situation where someone in authority dismissed your legitimate concerns or expertise? How did you handle it, and what would you do differently? Knowing that standing up for what's right can sometimes lead to outcomes better than you ever imagined. I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it who might be facing similar challenges. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming workplace injustice and finding strength through adversity. Share this with anyone who needs to remember that competence and courage can triumph over corruption and politics. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the people who try to eliminate you are actually creating the opportunity for your greatest success.